Hello, everyone. Welcome. I'm James Milan, and this is your Arlington Dollar. We every year, just about, although I have to say we skipped last year, every year, pretty much, we get to talk to our deputy town manager right around this time of year. Sandy Pooler is with us once more to discuss in some detail the numbers and the implications of this next fiscal year's budget, which is now officially under consideration by the town. So first of all, Sandy, thanks for carving out the time. I know you're busy.
Thank you,
So,
James. I'm always glad to be here to talk to you and to talk to the citizens of Arlington.
well, we really do appreciate it. And I think that curiosity is as high as it has ever been around what the budget's going to look like. And that is in large part due, of course, to what we have all been living through for 10 months and counting now. And that is the pandemic and all of its economic as well as social and health, et cetera, implications. So I think people have probably inundated you and your office with questions about this over time, but let's get it out of the way right, from the get-go. How much of an influence is COVID likely to have on this year's budget or this coming year's budget that we're talking about today?
Well, I think the biggest way that COVID has had an impact is it's raised so many questions. It has meant that so many of the things that we usually forecast in our revenue and expenditure side are up in the air. I will talk a little bit about that more in detail as we go along. When the federal government passed its COVID relief under what's called the CARES Act, they made money available to us to cover our COVID-related costs. And that's been good. So to the extent that we've had costs already in our school or town budgets that are over and above our regular budget, things like hiring people to be contact tracers in the health department, extra overtime for some of our public safety people to do some of their work, cleaning school buildings, cleaning town buildings, buying PPE, personal protective equipment, all that. The federal government gave us about $4 million, and we've spent about 3/4 of that so far on all those things, including, fortunately, being able to allow the school department to buy a lot more computers for kids to use at home. What it has not done is replaced any of the lost revenue that we've had on the town side. So there had been some talk about they're doing that. There's been some discussion about the Biden administration maybe doing that. But so far, it's just been extra cost matched by extra dollars. And the rest of our spending budget has not really changed yet.
Yeah, it's a really good point because I think everybody is hyper aware of the effect on the revenues being taken in by local businesses. And so we're very concerned. We've had a ongoing series here at ACMi, and just in general, the town is really taken a lot of steps to buttress and support our restaurants and shops and local businesses. People know that, but don't realize that there's also a connection, may not realize there's a connection straight to government coffers as well, because while we have often lamented that we don't have a larger commercial tax base in this town, I'm sure that tax base we do have has been gutted more or less by the fact that these businesses have had to have their doors closed.
Well, yes, we've seen severe cuts in the amount of revenue we've gotten from our motel tax and even more so from our meals tax. Although businesses are open, it's just at a fraction of what they've done in the past. So that's been one of our biggest cuts. We are a little worried about motor vehicle excise tax. Next month, we will get numbers from the state for our billing for that, but there are a number of things that we've had to reduce to a total of about $2 million in estimated revenue for the current fiscal year. because of these cuts.
So if that money, I mean, you know that's not there. It's been there before. It's not there now. Is that then reflected in the budget that is under consideration right now?
Well, it's been reflected in two budgets. It was reflected in the FY21, our current year budget, the year we're in the midst of right now, in that we did not spend up to the spending limits that we set in our long-range plan. The long-range plan has percentages increases every year for the town and the school budget. Both the town side and the school side reduced their spending below that. For FY22, the manager's budget just came out. It's the long-range plan part of it is online, as is the manager's letter to the public. And we have held back certain spending that we would like to make, but we are not confident in saying that we can make at this point in the budget cycle because of all the questions that we have. And the same thing on the school side, and I'll go into that in a little more detail, but I think in general, we have tried to hold back ultimately, both for the FY22 budget, and we know that by FY24, we're going to have another overall deficit and we'll need another override. And one of the things we're working very hard on now is to contain our spending now to minimize the size of that next override.
Yeah, so obviously in your world, you have to be thinking in multiple time frames all the time. And obviously the ways that those connect to each other, you know, may seem complicated or even you know, just hard to unravel to a lot of the audience. But there's no doubt that we will benefit from the you know, ongoing able stewardship of that stuff on the town end, and we will suffer if you know, there are miscalculations of any kind of significant sort, I assume. I wondered whether you might have at hand an example or two of the places that you've said on the town side that you know, are looking at reducing the outlays given the reduced income.
Well, in the town manager's budget for FY22, there were 4 positions that we think are important in the town to be able to fund, but we think we may not be able to fund or add this year. They include some in terms of management at the Department of Public Works. There's some related to the work that both our planning and our inspections departments do, because they both support our zoning board of appeals. And we've just been overwhelmed by both housing applications and zoning applications that it's been more work than those 2 departments can handle. And the library has also asked for more support for some of its children's services, because that has become an ever crucial service. All of those things are very important, but all of those things are on hold right now. Other things we've tried to keep going at a level service budget. We haven't increased the dollars, again, to try to keep our spending under control.
Right, makes sense, but these are the kinds of tough decisions that that you are faced with and that we will all be dealing with. So you've mentioned a couple of times that the schools you know, deserve a certain you know, amount of explanation and just treatment here in our conversation. I certainly agree. I think, again, our audience probably is coming at this from the perspective, perhaps they are families with students in the schools right now, coming at this probably with an awareness that, you know, not only has their visceral experience of having school-age children, you know, been different, but that the difficulties of doing schooling in the way that we have meant that people have left the schools, the public school system in many, many towns and cities, including Arlington. So I think with that kind of awareness, if you can walk us through what the situation looks like right now and going forward in schools and school budgets and school enrollments, et cetera.
Sure. So I'm going to share my screen here and show you some graphs I put together. This is a 20-year history of enrollment in the Arlington school system. In 2000, we had about 4,000 students in the school system. And FY20, last year, we topped 6,000. So that is almost a 50% increase in our school enrollment over the last 20 years. I've done some analysis just looking over the last 10 years, and I know that Arlington is one of the fastest growing. I reckon it is the second fastest growing school system in the state over the last 10 years.
Wow.
So we have a good school system. People like to move here and send their kids to school. And we were on this ongoing trajectory, bolstered by ever increasing school aid from the state because of our enrollment increase. And then along came COVID, and that really set things back. So I'm going to show you the next slide, which just shows two colors here. This was our original forecast in these blue lines of how many students we'd have going forward. And then what happened is the red line and a revised estimate. This current year, we went down 287 students from where we had been last year. Plus, we thought we were going to gain another 150 students. So that's almost 450 students difference between where we really ended up and where we thought we were going to end up. And every year in our budget, we add money to the school budget based on what we think the enrollment increase is going to be.
Mm-hmm.
So what happened for the FY21 school budget is we added a lot of money, but then the students didn't show up. And they went either to private school, or they were homeschooled, or particularly at the kindergarten and first grade level, people held their kids back from school. The question is, what's going to happen next year? We're all committed to making sure that the school department has the resources it needs to educate the students who come back. What they don't know, and what we on the town side don't know, is how many of those students are going to come back. So I'm just going to show you a couple of more slides about that. These slides show the same data I just showed. The prior assumption about increase, we thought we were going to go up 150. We in fact went down 287. In our prior forecast, we thought we were going to continue to go up 125 and then 82 and so forth. In our revised forecast, we're going from going down 287 to going up 334. That's a huge gap. As we've been discussing that huge gap and that huge up and down at the Long Range Planning Committee with members of the school committee, school administration, and the finance committee and the select board, we realized we really can't budget like that. We can't have the school budget bouncing up and down. So we've come up with a compromise, which I hope is clear. The old numbers I showed you are in these sort of faded blue and orange. What we did is we said for this year, we assumed instead of a big drop in enrollment or a big increase, we just assumed for budget purposes that there were going to be the same number of students as the previous year. And then we did a little, I think, clever math, and we measured how many students we think we're going to have next year versus how many we had last year. Mm-hmm. And that's going to be about an increase of 47 students. And then going forward, the increases are going to be the same as our revised forecast. All of which means that we are making some assumptions about school enrollment. The long-range planning committee is discussing amongst itself how to give the school department as much money as it needs, but not more than it needs. One of the downsides of giving them more than it needs is that it drains our override stabilization fund and makes it more likely that we'll need a bigger override in the future. So we don't want to do that. There's been some discussion, particularly among members of the Finance Committee, suggesting that we put aside a reserve for the Finance Committee to have at its disposal and to be able to give to the school committee later on, once the school committee knows its enrollment numbers and knows how many teachers it's going to have to hire. All of this is still up in the air. As I said before, all of these questions about enrollment, school budgets, and so forth are bigger question marks this year than any I've ever faced before in all my public budgeting career. So bottom line, we know we still have a good school system, an excellent school system. We know people still want to send their kids to this school system. We know a number of them didn't send their kids this year, but a large percentage are likely to come back next year. And hitting on that exact number is what we're working on now.
Yeah, and that's, if you want to just keep that slide up for one more minute here. I had a chance to go over the slides with you before we came on air, and this one was more confusing to me at that point than I now see that it is. And I see what I think what you're doing here, as you've pointed out, the 287 that goes down below the line in fiscal in this year, yep. Which again represents that kind of that mass of folks who decided that the current way that schooling is having to work just wasn't going to work for them with Arlington Public Schools, is matched to some degree by the 334 number in fiscal year 21, because that you're attempting to guess how many people among those who left will be coming back. And so that's, as you said, wild fluctuation, tough to do budgets, much better to go back to fiscal year 19 and then just take the number in red as you have it, and which is your best guess for how many more students there will be in the school system in fiscal year 21 than there was in 19. And because of the weirdness of the intervening time, this was the best way for you to kind of smooth that out.
Yes, that's right. So yes, I think we're all working hard together to make our best guesses and give the school department what it really needs next year.
Absolutely. And okay, and people's eyes are probably glazing at this point, but I have to say, the work that you do and the work that happens in long range planning, which I know you plan to talk about as well, is, as we have acknowledged before, an incredible game of multi-dimensional chess in some ways, in terms of just mixing what it is that you know and what formulas you can rely on, et cetera, with things that are just, you never know, right? Because they lie out in the future. So let's just fall back on your conclusion there, which is the town is prepared to support the school system, to make sure that it maintains its excellence and can once more accommodate the students as they come back in, which they undoubtedly will.
That's right. That's right.
All right, that's great. So you had mentioned, and I don't want to, if you'd rather talk about something else first, that's fine, but you'd mentioned when you first brought up the slides that the first slide that you had, and I know that looked to me, because I've seen them before, the next 5 years or so, kind of laid out in
Yeah,
budgetary
so
terms.
yeah, let me go back to that slide. This is our long range plan. It's a 5-year plan. FY21, the first column is where we are now. We're budgeting for FY22, and then it goes out 4 more years after that. And the important thing for the 5-year plan is that in the current years, 21 and 22, including 23, I don't know if you can see at the bottom, can you see there are black zeros down there?
Absolutely, yes. They are a big contrast to the red that follows.
Exactly right. So the red that follows means that we're going to have deficits in FY24, 25, and 26, and fairly substantial deficits at this point. When we passed the override in June of 2019, we knew that it would last us until FY24. We knew that we were making estimates about how big that deficit in 24 was going to be, and that number was going to change over time because it has every other time that we've had an override. And in fact, it has changed. It has changed a lot since that last override, as the state budget has changed and the town budgets have changed. So there are just a few things about this that I want to talk about that I think are important for people to understand. One, and again, the most important is we have deficits in the future, and I think they are very big deficits. So we need to continue to close the size of those deficits. Number two is on the revenue side, we have some good news this year already. The Lieutenant Governor and the Governor at our Mass Municipal Association conference last week told us that what's called our unrestricted general government aid was going to go up at the same percentage rate that the state revenue is projected to go up, which is 3.5%. That means for us about another $200,000 in the FY22 budget over what we expected. So that's good. There's still a huge, huge question as to what's going to happen with Chapter 70 education aid. The governor also announced that he was fully funding a program to adequately fund schools along something called the Student Opportunity Act that passed 2 years ago and was meant to more closely align the actual cost of educating students with the amount of school aid the state gave to cities and towns. And they had to back away from that in FY21 because of COVID, because they didn't have enough funds. What the governor hasn't told us yet, and we won't know until 2 days from now, this coming Wednesday, is how he's going to implement that and what that means for Arlington. So that will make a huge difference in our state aid, which will then roll out in this plan into the future and then affect how much money we have on hand now and how much we will have in the future to reduce the size of an override. The one other thing I want to say on the spending side is that when we passed the override last time, we made a commitment to increase the school budgets by $600,000 in FY20, $600,000 in 21, and then $800,000 in 22 and 23. In 21, we couldn't meet that promise. We could increase the school budget an extra $140,000 over what our other increases were going to be. But in this plan, we have readjusted it to give them more money in 22 and 23 so that we fulfill our commitment to the voters in the override and give the schools the funding that voters voted for. In other ways, we are trying to cut out unnecessary expenses and hope that in the current year, the school department may actually be able to turn back some money to the school. But we are trying to meet the commitments that the voters voted, and that the select board, the finance committee, and school committee all are working to make sure that we fulfill.
Okay, so when you say that working to make sure that those are fulfilled, there was basically a certain amount of increase in the budget, the school budget, that was to take place over 3 or 4 years. That first one of those years, it couldn't be met. So you're trying to increase what is provided in the ensuing years, so that at
Yes.
the end of that original term, the amount of money that people were expecting will in fact have been given.
Yes, I wanted to show this $1,030,000 was originally $800,000.
Okay, so sorry, we're looking at the operating budget for fiscal year 2022, because your cursor, it's not
Oh.
too easy to see your cursor, but
Okay, thank you. So
Mhm.
yes, the school budget, we were originally going to add 800,000 because in the previous year, we were not able to add the full 600,000. We split that difference from what we were going to add, and we boosted
I
this
see what you mean,
by
right?
230 here and another 230
Right.
here.
So 460,000 short in 2021, made up by 230 two increases of 230 each in 22 and 23.
That's exactly right.
That makes sense.
And otherwise, as I said, the town side budget right now is not going up at the full amount that usually does in other years. We will make final decisions before town meeting about what the town side budget has been. And then the other expenses we have here are pretty much just givens: our capital expense, our pensions, health insurance, state assessments, and so forth. And then on this budget, if you can see near the bottom, there's a reserve fund of $2.8 million, which is about $1 million bigger than we usually have in the reserve fund. That's where we're keeping that $1 million that the finance committee could give to the school department if school department's enrollment comes in higher than we're now projecting.
Great. So a little bit of a cushion there.
That's exactly right.
Sandy, let me ask you one last thing on this, and that is, you were mentioning that the deficits to come starting in fiscal year 2024 were predicted, even as of the last override, but you said that they have changed dramatically. I assume that they are dramatically larger than initially forecast.
They are larger, although there have been various points in the budget cycle where they've been even bigger. They've been up and down according to vastly different numbers that we've gotten over time about state aid and the state's ability to fund us. In the summer, when the budget passed, when the town budget passed, we had a deficit. I think it was close to $15 million in FY24 because state aid was projected to go down. When it finally came through, when the State House finally passed the state budget in October, several months late, they gave us much more money than we originally expected. So all of which is to say, this number has fluctuated. It has changed every month or so, and it will change again. But before we get to the point that we have an override, we have to get it down to a number that is big enough to meet our needs, but not too big so that people won't vote for an override.
Right.
We are very aware that it's not an unlimited amount that the generous people of Arlington will raise their taxes to support services. It's got to be a reasonable amount.
So the hit to local receipts that you had mentioned earlier in the conversation, that has been a hallmark of these last 10 months and more. How did you figure that into the budget going forward? Do you expect a rebound for local businesses and therefore for those local receipts, but not up to previous levels? Yeah, just how did you
Yes.
figure that out?
So last March, when COVID first hit, and then going into town meeting, we started to see how our local receipts were affected. And we could see within a couple of months that hotel tax and meals taxes had dropped 30 and 60% respectively. And so we carried those drops forward in our projections for the next year. We had read about drops in car sales, which made us drop our motor vehicle excise tax estimates. And as I say, those bills come out every year in February, so I'm waiting next month to see what actually happens with that. And there are a few other minor adjustments here and there, but what we looked at, and we do this every month, we look at our actuals coming in. We took those figures into account and made those adjustments. And then going into the future, we will ramp them back up again, but not all at once. We'll ramp them up over the next couple of years back to our old levels, and hope that the restaurants that have closed will be replaced, that the hotels that have been vacant will have their rooms filled, that the restaurants whose businesses cut down will return to normal. But that will probably take a couple of years to really get us back to where we were.
All right, great. So, baked in to the numbers here is an assumption, cautious but optimistic, that we will return to, not just a new normal, but the kinds of numbers that we were seeing up until the pandemic hit.
That's right.
All right, good to know. Well, we're running out of time, but I wanted to ask whether there's any either high-profile items or areas, or just an overall message that you haven't had a chance to give yet to the Arlington public before we sign off.
I would say if you were a member of the public wondering what's happening on the budget, I have had more meetings with more people this year than any other year, including with elected and appointed officials. We are putting a lot of work into this. I think we are being fiscally prudent and cautiously optimistic. We will have enough money to supply essential services on the town and school side. And we will work to keep it all in balance so that the next time we do ask for an override, it will be a sustainable and reasonable sized override. And we welcome your questions and input, and we look forward to seeing our town meeting members at town meeting and getting another budget passed.
All right. Thank you very much for your time, Sandy. We'll let you get back to work. And we appreciate this walk through some very serious and, frankly, from my own perspective, not quite as daunting numbers as I might have feared. So let's hope that there are other members of the audience also pleasantly surprised in some ways. So
well, thank you,
carry on
James.
with your good work, sir.
Well, thank you, James. It's been a pleasure talking to you.
Great. And we will see you soon enough, I'm sure. Best of luck. I have been speaking, this is your Arlington Dollar, of course. I'm James Milan, and I have been speaking to our Deputy Town Manager and the guru of all things financial here in town, Sandy Pooler. We appreciate Sandy's time and yours as well. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next time.